The books that we're going to talk about in this video are so influential and conducive to a lot of the happiness in my life. Now, I didn't want to start this video off being dramatic and deep, but that is me. We are talking about me here, guys. These books have actually changed my life and have contributed towards so much of the joy that I feel, and I'm so grateful that I have read them. These are the books that got me into fantasy. In this video, we're going to talk about books that got me into the genre of reading fantasy, so whether that's ones that I've read as a child, ones that I've read as an adult, and the ones that have been the most inspiring or the most influential. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to give some honourable mentions to some fantasy books that I cannot wait to read, that I've heard lots about. I feel like I'm going to love them, but I haven't read them yet at the time of filming this video. So if you like fantasy, if you want some recommendations, or you just want to talk about books that got you into fantasy as well, then you've come to the right place, because that is exactly what we're going to discuss in this video, and I'm so glad that you're here. So if you enjoyed this style of content, make sure to give it a thumbs up to let me know, and please leave me in the comments what your favourite fantasy books are as well, and the books that got you into fantasy. Let's keep this conversation going, guys. Hope you enjoy. Let's jump straight into this video. I don't want to waste your time. I've got to talk about, first of all, the most influential fantasy book series I have ever read. It is the reason why I created this booktube channel. It's the reason why I went from just doing general lifestyle vlogs to filming just about books, because this is the most influential series I'd ever read. When you get started with the journey of this book series, you are in it deep. Like, this is a deep series. Most of you have probably guessed already what it is, but that is the A Song of Ice and Fire series by George R.R. Martin. I'd always enjoyed fantasy books when I was a child, but I would say it was very like beginner fantasy. This was the first book series that I read that was hardcore fantasy. I would not recommend this for a beginner, but my goodness, this is actually brilliant. The emotional journey that this book series takes you on is unmatched. I've not had another book series make me feel the way that this one has done. This is obviously the first book, A Game of Thrones, but there are many others. Duh. They're all quite big books, the font size is really small, they are not for the faint-hearted. It's actually overwhelming how many emotions this book series makes you feel. I can't quite process it. Now, I read A Song of Ice and Fire whilst I was an adult. I started reading it in 2020 and I finished it earlier this year. I think it's been about 4 months since I finished the current last book. I say current, I'm hoping that will not remain the case. I am impatiently waiting for Winds of Winter. Will it ever see the light of day? Who knows? I think one of the main reasons why I love this book series so much is because of the world that George R.R. Martin has built. There is so much historic lore, everything feels well established, well integrated. It feels like a real universe, but it's not, and that is such a skill. He also writes from so many different character perspectives, and they all feel different. He embodies all of these different personalities, all of these different viewpoints. It's just amazing. A lot of you who watch my channel quite frequently have probably read this book series. I'm not gonna lie, I feel like a lot of you have, but if you're new here and you haven't read it, then I would say this is not a beginner fantasy book, but if you enjoy fantasy, you've got to read it. It's just incredible. I can't explain it, I can't put it into words. Shameless plug, but I am also currently watching the Game of Thrones TV series. I am 6 episodes in. Yeah, and I did do a review of the first episode, and I've got some live reactions coming up within the next few weeks as well, so stay tuned if you like that kind of content or you just want to see what I think to the TV show. But the books, guys, the books! So I obviously had to start off with talking about this book series because it's the most influential, it's the reason why I wanted to create my booktube channel, and it is one of the main reasons why as an adult I still love fantasy. It's just great. And then off the back of that, I've got to talk about my favourite book of 2024 so far, if not one of my favourites ever. Strong statement. I've read a lot of books. I think this is genuinely one of my favourites ever. And this is A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by George R.R. Martin. I can't fault this book. This to me is a perfect book. I absolutely loved it, and I only read it again like 4 months ago maybe. And this is the Dunk and Egg novellas. It's set in the same world, the same universe as A Song of Ice and Fire, but it's like a prequel to the events that take place from Game of Thrones. There is actually a TV series coming up in 2025 about this, which I'm a little bit apprehensive about because I love this book so much and I value it so much, and I don't want the TV adaptation to be not living up to the greatness that this is, you know? But this is just brilliant, and if you haven't read this but you've read A Song of Ice and Fire, then I would highly recommend it. I also actually think this is a pretty good beginner to fantasy book. The writing style is a little bit more simple than in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's not as intricate. It's a very strong world that has been built. The characters are likeable. There's some juicy stuff that goes down. I would say that this is just a brilliant, brilliant book. Perfect in my eyes. So I had to obviously mention this when I'm talking about fantasy books, duh. Now let's talk about, I think, the first ever book series for fantasy that I ever read. Like, I think this is genuinely the first time I ever delved into fantasy. I was a child when I read this series. I reread it again as an adult and still absolutely loved it. And that, of course, is the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. Now, look at the difference in the size of these books. This one is the first and this one is the fifth, I think. Yeah, Order of the Phoenix is fifth. Philosopher's Stone is first, which I feel like in some other countries is called the Sorcerer's Stone. Not in England, it ain't. These books are absolutely incredible, and I think that they are perfect for beginner to fantasy. One thing that I will say as well is that the first two books are written for children, essentially. Like, they are very basic language, very simplistic writing style. I would not read a book now that is written like the first Harry Potter book is, because in my opinion it is very, very basic. It's definitely like, if this is your first ever fantasy book, then this is a great one to read. And I felt the same for the second book in the series. However, the third book onwards is as though it just grew up. Like, those books are for adults. This is an incredible book, and the writing style, it just goes from 0 to 100 like that in the case of a book. By the end of the series, you feel like that was a book that was for a young adult, if not an adult. Like, it's so intricate, it's such a detailed writing style, so much happens, there's so much world building, and again, the emotional journey that it takes you on is just fantastic. So I would say that you could tell me that the first book and the final book were written by two different authors and I would believe you, because that is how different the writing style is. But it is still this Harry Potter world, this universe that the author has created, and it is brilliant. It's so magical, it's so whimsical. I got lost in the book series from like book 3 onwards. I also think the movie adaptations are fantastic, maybe the best adaptation of a book I've ever seen in my life. So if you're considering reading Harry Potter but you are an adult, I would say just get through the first book. It's really, really quick. You can get through that in a day. It is so quick and easy to read. Fly through that. Do not judge the series based on the first book. Judge it based on these chunky boys, because this is a beautiful book. I just cannot express my love. And the third book onwards in Harry Potter is why Harry Potter deserves its hype. Not the first two. The first two, they're meh. But the others really bring it back, and I actually kind of want to reread it again. I loved it. I loved my time reading Harry Potter. It was so great. I did read the whole series as a child, and it's what got me into fantasy. It was the reason why I kept reading fantasy, because I just loved it so much. The next book series I read shortly after I'd read Harry Potter, so I was like tween, like child tween. I don't have the book series with me. I thought I'd kept it, but I have a feeling now that I donated it to charity, because I don't think I'm going to read it again, because I am a bit old for it, I think. I think I'm old for it. And this is the Fallen series by Lauren Kate. This is like a religious fantasy, I would say. There's a lot of details and reference to the past in terms of religion. This is one of the only book series that made me cry full on tears at the end of it. Now, I don't cry very often when watching TV or reading books. I'm not a massive crier for things that are not a reality. I cry a lot at things that happen in my personal life that have actually happened, but when it comes to like books, TV shows that are fictional, I don't really cry ever. I did cry at Marley and Me, makes sense. And I did cry when I finished reading the Fallen series by Lauren Kate. The journey that this book series took me on, again, it was unmatched. I felt so many deep emotions. It's such like I suppose in a way, it's like a romantasy, even though I wouldn't have classed it as that back then, but it is. It's just about this love between two people that spanned the course of centuries. And this was another one of the main reasons why I absolutely love fantasy books. Like, I felt so strongly about this series. They did try and do a movie or like a TV adaptation, and it wasn't very good, unfortunately, which is such a shame. But it was just amazing. And I would say that if you are a young adult or an adult who's never read fantasy before, I would recommend Fallen by Lauren Kate, and I just loved it. And I have thought about rereading it more recently, but I just don't really have the time, especially when I already know what happens. And like, I want to read A Song of Ice and Fire because I feel like there's details I will have missed the first time around. With Fallen by Lauren Kate, I don't think there's any details I missed first time around. I feel like I clocked onto everything, and I don't feel like there's that much detail that you overlook things, whereas I feel like with A Song of Ice and Fire, there is so much going on that you probably do miss quite a few things that you'd need to go back and reread. I don't feel like I need to do that with Lauren Kate, but I just love this series so, so much. It'll always have a soft space in my heart, and I really, really, truly cried at the end of it. And I actually didn't like the ending because it made the rest of the series feel pointless, and that's all I'm gonna say. Next book that got me into fantasy. Now this series is classed as a gothic fantasy. I read this series for the first time in 2020 on my very long commutes when the world had been shut down and I was one of the only people who was still going to work. And I remember I used to commute and it felt like the world was a ghost town, and it felt very scary, creepy vibes. And this book is also scary, creepy vibes, and it was the perfect book to read. This is the Department 19 series by Will Hill. I will say this here right now, this is my favourite book series ever. I rated every single book a 5 stars. The emotions, it was so deeply felt. So when researching online, it does say it is classed as a horror fantasy, and it is basically about this military operation group called Department 19 that is set to track down and hunt supernatural creatures. The main character is a young boy. He's like a teenager. He's very, very likable. There's also some of like the bad guys in it who are also very likable, very witty, very funny characters. It's set in modern day, and it's like got a lot of military themes around it, but it is around magical supernatural creatures. And I do believe it's the best book series that I've ever read. I also have such strong emotions linked to it because of the time in my life and in the world that was happening. These are quite big books as well. I would say each book is around the thickness of that. They are big books, and I flew through them. I read them all in the space of just a few months, which is very fast for me. I just absolutely loved everything about that book series. I can't wait to reread it. I remember everything that happened. It's a little bit brutal. I think it set me up well for A Song of Ice and Fire. It's quite a brutal story. Will Hill doesn't hold back on the gore and the detail. I just loved it so, so much. So I obviously have to mention that because it is my favourite fantasy book series of all time. So those were the main books that got me into fantasy. So I talked about the first book series that I'd ever read. I talked about the most influential ones over the past few years, which would be Department 19 and A Song of Ice and Fire. I talked about one from when I was a young adult, teenager, that was highly influential. Those are all of the series that really sparked my passion for fantasy books. Now I'm going to give some honourable mentions to some of the books that have kept that passion going. These are all books that I've actually read this year or last year, so very, very recently. But they've kept this love for fantasy going. They've really maintained that passion for fantasy books, and I'm so, so glad that I've read these recently. And a lot of these books have actually made 2024 a fantastic reading year, and it's made me want to read more. Like, I've been upping my reading goal every single month for the year because I just cannot stop reading, and it is largely due to these books that I'm about to mention. So this next one I'm going to talk about, I think I am a bit late to the party with this book because people tend to read this when they're a little bit younger, but I've read it as an adult and I absolutely loved it. So I wouldn't say it is tailored to young people because I ain't that young anymore. This is a phenomenal book. This is, oh, I was so close to rating it 5 stars, so close. This is Eragon by Christopher Paolini. Forget the movie. The movie is trash. Forget it. That doesn't exist, okay? We don't talk about that on this channel. This book, however, phenomenal. I very, very recently filmed a Eragon review on my channel, so I will not go into it into too much detail. I do actually have the second book in the series on my November TBR to read this month. I might have even have started it by the time I upload this video. I loved Eragon so much. This is such a wholesome book. It is about a young boy called Eragon and his dragon companion called Saphira, and it's just about the adventures and the juicy stuff that they get up to. If you are a frequent visitor to my channel, then thanks very much, but also you will know I have a thing about dragons, a bit of an obsession, I won't lie, and this book is about dragons, and I just absolutely adored everything about Eragon. I would recommend this for a beginner of fantasy. I would recommend this even if you're not a beginner to fantasy, which I wouldn't say that I am. This one is a very easy writing style and storyline to follow, but I still absolutely loved it. Oh, Eragon, I love you. Mwah. Another book that I'm going to talk about, because this one, for some reason online, people are calling it romantasy. Now, so far, I don't think it is. I think it is much more fantasy than romantasy. I've just finished reading the 3rd or 4th book in this series, and there's a small romance element, but there's a small romance element in all of these books that I've mentioned, I'm not gonna lie. Harry Potter, there's a small one in. Eragon, there's probably gonna be a small one in. So unless something really ramps up at the end of the series, I'm not sure. But I'm absolutely loving this, and this is the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. I am hooked by this series. I am absolutely loving it. I think that the cover art for each book in the series is beautiful. It's a long series as well. There's so many books, and this is about an assassin called Selena Sardothien, and you're basically just following her life and the kind of tasks that she has been employed to do. And also, this isn't a spoiler because she, you know, the book starts off within the first few chapters detailing this, that she is employed as the king's assassin, and there's some tasks that she is set to do and some trials that she is set to do that she obviously doesn't want to, but she has to fulfill because she has been ordered by the king to do it. And I just absolutely love it. I am really enjoying this book series. I just finished reading Crown of Midnight in this series, and I've rated it a 5 stars because I love it. This first one I rated a 4 stars. I read the prequel before I read this, which I would recommend doing, and I rated that 4 stars. It was great. I think it's a great one for fantasy lovers. It's such a long series, so you can really get stuck into it. Again, this has maintained my love for fantasy in 2024. I cannot wait to read the rest of the books in the series, and I just think it's brilliant. Now, on a similar wavelength, this one is romantasy, which I do enjoy. Like, I did enjoy this book series. I don't know if it deserves all the hype that it is getting online, but it's an okay read. I did enjoy it, and again, it sparked me wanting to read more books along this line. This is A Court of Thorn and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I definitely prefer Throne of Glass at the moment by the same author, but this book is a great introduction to fantasy, I would say. Or you are somebody who loves like a romance aspect, but also that fantasy side. It's a very good hybrid between the two. It's not just a love story. There's a lot of politics in this. There's a lot of world building. There's the use of magic. There's a lot of magical creatures. It's a really great established world, and I think that's why I love the series, is because of the world that the author has created. Like, forget about the romance side. Like, the actual world that she's created is brilliant, but the romance is just the cherry on top. This first book was not that great. There's 5 books in the series at the time of me recording this. The first one, 2.5 out of 5 stars. It's okay. But the second one onwards, fantastic. So if you are reading ACOTAR or you've just read the first book and you're not sure whether or not to continue, I would encourage you to forget about this book, okay? I don't even think the events of this book particularly matter to the rest of them. I don't know why this book is here. Why are you here? But the second one onwards, fantastic, absolutely brilliant. And I'm so glad that I read this book series, and it sparked me wanting to read more and get embedded into more worlds in the fantasy realm. I've been talking so fast that I can feel my voice has gone sore. Well, I don't have much left to talk about, so we are almost done, don't worry. Another book that I would love to mention that I think again is a very, very good introduction into fantasy. This one is good for guys, gals, whatever you are, and also I think it's great for people who like D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. If you enjoyed playing like fantasy games, then I think this book is great because it feels like one of those games in a book, and this is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. Again, I don't have my copy with me. I did only recently read it. I read it like, what, maybe a few months ago, and I think it's in this room, but where the hell have I put it? It's so wholesome. It's very quick to read through, very, very easy writing style, very simple if I'm being honest. And I think if you want to read your first ever fantasy book, I think that's a great one. It wasn't my first ever fantasy book, but I did still enjoy it. I got through it very quickly. It's basically about, are they an orc? I feel like there might be an orc. Can't remember what creature the main character is, so I'm really sorry if that's annoying, but either way, they're like some kind of orc thing. And they moved to this little village to open up a cafe, and that's it. That's the premise of it. Obviously there's like quests that they need to go on, there's different challenges and barriers that get in the way. There's some really cool characters. I think the characters make the story because there's lots of different species that you learn about, and they are obviously all within the fantasy genre, and it's great. It's just really, really great. It was a very nice read, very wholesome, not too heavy. There's also another one by the same author that I haven't read, which I think is called Bookshops and Bone Dust. And I would recommend that as either your first fantasy book or just if you are looking for something quick, easy, light-hearted to read. Maybe something like a palate cleanser after you've read A Song of Ice and Fire. You don't want anything too deep. You want to just process the previous book series that you've read, but you still want to read something that's just, you don't have to think about it too much. I would 100% recommend Legends and Lattes. It was just very refreshing, very easy. Oh boy, I do love talking about books. I could sit here all day. And then the final couple of books that I want to mention, they're books that I'm looking forward to reading, and I think a lot of people who read fantasy read these books. I've heard these books talked about everywhere. I think they're very influential to the fantasy world. I'm a little bit disappointed that I haven't read them so far. How can you be a fantasy lover and not have read these books? So I am going to rectify that very, very soon. So the first one is The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien. I have not read this. I've watched the movies. Again, they're brilliant, brilliant movies. I don't know if they're good adaptations or not for the book because I have not read the book. But the movies, 10 out of 10. I did watch Rings of Power, the TV series. We won't talk about that. Last time I talked about that on my channel, I got a lot of hate, so let's just gloss over that for a sec. But the book that I'm really, really excited to read, this is going to be one of the first books that I read in 2025. I will review it on my channel, and I just think that if you are a lover of fantasy, you have to read this book, surely. It's so influential, and I think that this is a book that got a lot of people into fantasy. So I don't have too much to say on it right now because I have not read it, but I'm really looking forward to. I cannot wait. And then one review that will be coming up very, very soon, because this is the next book that I am going to read. I'm going to read this one either before or after I've read the second Eragon book, Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I'm hearing Robin Hobb being talked about everywhere at the moment, and I'm so excited to read this book. This is the first book in the Farseer trilogy. Firstly, the front cover of that is absolutely beautiful. Wow, that is a gorgeous, gorgeous book. And I can't wait to start my journey with Robin Hobb. I have actually heard some incredible things. I'm not 100% sure what this book is really about. I can see that there is an assassin, there's an illegitimate child that I think the book is based around. And my review for this book will be coming very soon on my channel. It's not actually too big of a book, and I think that this is also what has sparked a lot of people's passion for fantasy as well. So if you've not read this book but you're into fantasy, let's start it together. I'm going to be reading it this month, so why don't you pick up your copy and we can read it together and have a chat about it and see what we think. I need a glass of water big time. So I have rambled on for goodness knows how long talking about fantasy books, but that is what I love to do. Time flies when you're having a lot of fun, and I was having a lot of fun. Those are all the books that have got me into fantasy and have maintained my love for fantasy. What got you into fantasy? What do you think a fantasy lover needs to read? Is there anything in here that I haven't read that you think somebody who loves fantasy should read? Let me know in the comments, that would be great. Also, if you do have any video requests that you want to see me film, then please leave those in the comments as well, because I'm always open to ideas and I want to film what you want to see. Thank you for being here and for listening to me ramble and talk for so long. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up to let me know. I will leave some videos in the description box that I think are relevant for you and that you will hopefully enjoy. If you like my content and you want to see more from me, then please subscribe, because it's free and it means that you can see my videos easier. I will see you next time, or rather you'll see me, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'm gonna go read a fantasy book now. Oh, books are just great, aren't they? Bye for now.